Okay, it's time for another story. Are you ready? This one is called Paddington and the Busy Day. One morning, Paddington looked out of his bedroom window and saw that it was raining outside. He was very disappointed. He had planned to spend the day in the garden, and now he had nothing to do. "How about doing some painting?" suggested Judy. "You can borrow my box of paints if you like." "There's a bowl of fruit in the other room," said Mrs. Brown. "Why don't you try painting that?" "That should keep him quiet for a while," said Mr. Brown, as Paddington left the room. But Paddington was back in no time at all. He held up the bowl of fruit for everyone to see. "I've painted it blue so that it will match the wallpaper," he said. "I have a feeling it is going to be one of those days," groaned Mrs. Bird. "Has anyone else got any good ideas?" "You could help Mrs. Bird in the kitchen," said Mrs. Brown. "How about tidying up the loft?" said Mrs. Bird hastily. "Your stamps need putting into an album," said Jonathan. "If you have any paste left over," said Judy, "you could stick lots of things together and make a collage like the one on the wall." Paddington thought for a moment. "I think I'll start in the kitchen," he said. "I may make some pastry. Bears like pastry." "I think it's time I went to the office," said Mr. Brown. Paddington was soon hard at work making pastry. He used over half a bag of flour, and he ended up with most of it over himself. "You'd better go upstairs and have a wash," said Mrs. Bird, "or you will end up looking like a polar bear." "I do hope it stops raining soon," said Mrs. Brown. On his way upstairs, Paddington remembered his stamps. His Aunt Lucy, who lived in the Home for Retired Bears in Lima, was always sending him postcards. He collected them all into a big pile and took them along to the bathroom so that he could get the stamps off with the water at the same time as he washed. But as soon as the water started mixing with the flour, it turned into a paste, and in no time at all he found he had more stamps stuck to his duffel coat than in his album. Paddington decided it might be a good time to try his paw at tidying the loft. At least no one would be able to see him up there. He made himself some marmalade sandwiches and found his torch. Then he climbed up the special folding ladder Mr. Brown used for going into the roof. Paddington had never been in the loft before, and it was much darker than he had expected. He hadn't gone very far when he stepped on a loose board by mistake. The other end came up and hit him on the back of the head. The torch went one way, the marmalade sandwiches went another way, and Paddington went straight through his bedroom ceiling. Back in his room, Paddington gazed up at the hole. "Oh dear," he said to the world in general. "I think I'm in trouble again." He looked at himself sadly in the mirror, wondering what to do next, and as he did so, he had an idea. He fetched his pastry and the rest of the flour from the kitchen. Then he collected Judy's painting set and the rest of his stamps. After that, he found a bucket and a large spoon and some old newspapers, and he set to work. The Browns could hardly believe their eyes when they saw what Paddington had been up to. "I've never seen a collage on a ceiling before," said Judy. "I wish I'd thought of it," said Jonathan. "It looks good enough to eat," said Mrs. Brown. "Whatever gave you the idea?" "It came to me," said Paddington vaguely. "It's what's known as a ceilingage. I shall keep it there to remind me of all the things you can do on a rainy day." "I think," said Mrs. Bird, "rain or no rain, it's high time you had a bath." And even Paddington had to agree that was the best idea he had heard so far that day. "The trouble with having nothing to do," he said, "is that you do get very sticky, especially if you happen to be a bear." So that's the end of the story. I hope you're keeping busy at home, and I hope you're not driving your mum and dad up the wall, and make sure you're doing lots of jobs around the house, okay? All right, good night from me. Have a nice sleep.